Hello, y'all. My name is Samantha Luley, and today I will be talking to y'all about this topic of freedom of speech and how it impacts college campuses across the United States. My topic, as I just stated, is freedom of speech on college campuses. But more specifically, I want to dive into the positive usage of free speech, like the educational value that can be derived from it, but also the negative usage of free speech, like hate speech. My thesis, in essence, is to define why hate speech should not be a protected form of free speech under the United States Constitution. First, I'd like to talk about the United States Constitution and the role that it specifically plays in freedom of speech, both the guidelines and how it is specifically defined, but also the limitations through certain court cases. The what and why of the United States Constitution. The exact verbatim of the Constitution reads, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for redress of grievances." It matters for numerous reasons. One of those reasons is because the Constitution creates a foundation for freedom of speech. It creates the parameters that people operate within in order to communicate, express ideas, opinions, and thoughts. Another reason why it's significant is because of the different interpretations of freedom of speech. Not everyone has the same idea of what it means. Topics like pornography and hate speech have been highly debated and contested in recent years. The United States Constitution is also a living document, which means it evolves with different court cases and legal issues that help create more boundaries or give more freedom with regards to the interpretation of it. It's also very highly debated. As I mentioned previously, people have been debating its meaning and the interpretation of it for many years. Different court cases allow for this debate to become more clear. For example, in West Virginia v. Barnett in 1943, it made forcing people to pledge the allegiance unconstitutional. In Texas v. Johnson in 1989, it made burning the American flag as a symbol of speech allowed and permissible. And in RAV versus St. Paul in 1992, it said that the display of symbols that arouse anger, alarm, or resentment in others on the basis of race, color, creed, religion, or gender is unconstitutional. The Constitution and the court cases help give us a clearer picture of what we can and cannot say and how we can and cannot express ourselves. I've used the term hate speech a few times so far, but to give it a more clear definition, hate speech is talk that attacks an individual or specific group based on a protected attribute, such as the target's sexual orientation, gender, religion, disability, color, or country of origin. Why is hate speech bad? One of the first reasons why hate speech is bad is because of the psychological harm it can have on the folks who are affected by it. This means people who are of a certain race or sex or sexual orientation and other categories. It can also cause mental harm. This can take form in mental illnesses like depression or suicidal ideation and other mental ailments, which are very harmful to the folks who they can affect. Hate speech also perpetuates a cycle of discrimination by enabling and continuing racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, and other problematic language. It creates an environment where things like these are permissible, which means they are continued to be used and enacted against different folks, which can lead to the psychological and mental harm aforementioned. In order to further explain the concept of the perpetuating cycle of discrimination, I examined a study by Gloria Cowan and John Metrick titled "The Effects of Target Variables and Settings on Perceptions of Hate Speech." In this study, they had three groups of people. The first group of people were the targets. They had hate speech used directly at them. The second group of people were those who utilized the hate speech or said the things to the targets. The third group, which was the group they observed, was the viewers, in which they observed the targets getting hate speech used against them. In this study, Cowan and Metrick were observing the viewers to see the different ways in which they reacted. What they observed, however, was interesting. When the viewers saw the targets not react to hate speech or not react as much, then the viewers perceived that the hate speech wasn't as impactful or wasn't as offensive as it might have really been. However, when the viewers saw that the targets visibly reacted to the hate speech, then they perceived the hate speech to be more offensive or more impactful. This was significant to me because it set up a double standard, one in which if you do not react to the hate speech that is being directed at you, then you're not perceived as being as targeted by this language. Whereas if you do react, then in some cases you might be considered over-emotional, over-dramatic, or blowing things out of proportion. And I think it's a lose-lose situation in a way, because either you're not reacting enough to be credible, or you're overreacting and you lose that credibility anyway, which can be very harmful for folks who are the targets of hate speech. As freedom of speech has evolved, so too has the interpretations. One party, which is a major contributor to that interpretation, is social media and the internet as a whole. The internet's role in hate speech is quite large and can be enacted in many different ways, as I will explain next. One study which helps establish the link between social media and internet and freedom of speech is a survey on automatic detection of hate speech in text conducted by Sergio Nunez and Paolo Fortuna. In this, they describe different platforms that use automatic hate speech detection. These platforms include Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and other internet websites that have a large popularity. Then they lay out different definitions for these different websites. For example, Twitter's definition of hate speech is hateful conduct. You may not promote violence against or directly attack or threaten other people on the basis of race, ethnicity, national origin, sexual orientation, gender identity, religious affiliation, age, and other categories. Each website has their own unique definition for hate speech and the ways which it can and cannot be permissible on their platforms. This study also outlaid the different ways that these websites curb hate speech. The different techniques are numerous. One of the techniques they listed is bag of words, or BOW for short. In BOW, the website automatically detects certain words and blocks them. For example, many children's websites use this, like Club Penguin or other platforms. In this instance, any word that is marked by the website as being inappropriate will be blocked. The only issue with this, however, they state, is that even when a word is being used in a context outside of its direct usage, it's still blocked. For example, X word is discriminatory and should not be permissible, would still be blocked on a website because the direct word, in this case X, is still being used, regardless of the fact that the context means it shouldn't be allowed or not. Next, I want to address why there are some folks who wouldn't want to curb hate speech or who would want to permit the continual usage of it. First, I want to address who doesn't want to stop hate speech. There are three groups of people I have identified. First, it's the First Amendment scholars. Secondly, folks who don't experience hate speech. And third, those who value their free speech very highly. Next, I want to address why they don't want to stop it. I believe that the First Amendment scholars don't wish to stop hate speech because they believe in a strict interpretation of the Constitution. And because the Constitution doesn't define hate speech or list it anywhere, that means that the scholars wouldn't want to abide by that. Next, people who don't experience hate speech have a lack of empathy and understanding, I find, in this area. They don't understand what it's like to be the target of hate speech, which means they don't understand what it's like to be receiving it. And then there are those who value their free speech. This just means that they value the freedom and what the U.S. Constitution has laid out that they are guaranteed to be able to say. Next, I want to address why it should be stopped. I feel that hate speech can hurt other people and can have, like I mentioned earlier, psychological and mental consequences for them. I also believe that the Constitution evolves with different court cases, and that one strict interpretation shouldn't be followed. Third, I believe in utilitarianism, which means the most amount of good for the most amount of people. And when we permit hate speech that can cause harm to a significant number of our population, then I do not believe that that causes the most amount of good for the most amount of people. And that's why it should not be permitted. So in conclusion, I find that hate speech is a type of language that should not be permitted. It has clear mental health consequences, psychological consequences, and a perpetuating cycle of discrimination and intolerance that leads to the psychological consequences aforementioned. I believe that social media and the internet has a huge role and a huge responsibility in helping stop and curb the uses of hate speech. I believe that the U.S. Constitution is a living document, and therefore more court cases that help redefine freedom of speech, ones that would not permit hate speech, should be included as well. Thank you for listening to my presentation.